Hello there. So we're all working from home now, and we are going on quite a few months in a row of working at home. So we're starting to get into territory where people who are salaried employees may have deductions available to them that they wouldn't have had in the past. So that's what we're talking about today. So there's a few different kinds of deductions that you can make as a salaried employee, but in order to deduct anything, you need to have a form signed by your employer. It's called a T-2200, and it's basically just stating what the terms of your employment are. So it's saying what you can deduct, basically. If you have one of these forms, it will tell you the expenses that you can deduct, but here are some things that you can keep in mind in terms of what you might be able to deduct. So vehicle expenses is one of the main ones. If you are forced to is a strong word. If you have to drive around for your employment, but your employer doesn't pay for your vehicle, then you might be able to deduct your expenses. So that would be things like gas and maintenance and insurance, registration, that kind of thing. Maybe a capital cost allowance, which is really just spreading out the cost of the vehicle, like the amount that you paid for it over a number of years. Interest on your vehicle if you have a loan on it, and if you're leasing, then the lease payments, the interest in the lease payments has a limit on it, but for the most part, the average lease is fully deductible, and the interest is either the interest paid or about $10 a day or so. So in most cases, the interest that's paid out is deductible, ends up being deductible. Something else is travel expenses. So travel expenses are really just if you have to travel and you don't get reimbursed for that. So that's different than vehicle expenses. You can't, this is more about like trains and buses, and if you had to stay in a hotel, or then like if you had to eat and you're outside of your city, that kind of thing. If you're reimbursed for travel expenses and if you're reimbursed for motor vehicle expenses, then you can't deduct these on your taxes. Supplies is something else that you can deduct. You might be able to deduct things like ink for your printer, or like toners or stationery, that kind of thing you can deduct on your taxes. If it's on that 2200 that you were given by your employer. Things like briefcases and calculators, not deductible, unfortunately. You also can't deduct your internet expense, which is unfortunate, but you can deduct a little piece of your cell phone. So whatever percentage that you're using your cell phone for work, again, if it's in that 2200 form that you got, you need to be able to prove to the CRA if they ever asked you, how many minutes are you spending on the phone for work versus personal, and the same with your data, so that you can get a percentage. So say you were able to prove that you had 50% that you're using for work, then you could claim 50% of your cell phone costs. And the other big one is work from home expenses. So work from home expenses are utilities, repairs and maintenance, and rent if you pay rent. So you can deduct those expenses to the proportion, or proportionately to the amount that you actually use your space for work. So if you have a bedroom in your house that you use exclusively as your office, then you could divide the total square foot of that office into the square footage of the whole house, and you get the percentage of your utilities and rent and that kind of thing that you could deduct on your taxes. Sometimes that's not super reasonable, in the sense that if you were to fully renovate the garage, not really relevant to the office that you're using. But if you had to put in new flooring or something like that into the office, then you might be able to deduct the full amount. So repairs and maintenance is a bit trickier than just the straight up percentage, but for utilities and rent, for sure, you can do that. You cannot deduct mortgage, interest, property taxes, home insurance, or any kind of capital cost allowance like we talked about with the vehicle. So the cost of your home over a long period of time. Those ones specifically for salaried employees, you cannot deduct. which is unfortunate. You can deduct those things if you earn income in other ways, but not specifically as a salaried employee. And commission employees are different. I'm not talking about commission employees. Well, a lot of this stuff applies for commission employees. You can deduct more expenses as a commission employee. So I'm not going to get into that today. That'll be live for another day. But if you're on commission, then just know that you might be able to deduct some additional things. So those are the big things that you're able to deduct. Make sure to get that 2200 form from your employer. You definitely need that. And the form that you fill out on your taxes is a T777, Statement of Employment Expenses, aptly named. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention about vehicle expenses, it includes parking. You can deduct the parking expenses, but you can't deduct the parking if you have to pay to park at your employer's location. Like that's just a personal expense. You can't deduct that. But if you're out and about and you have to park for work, then you can deduct that full amount. But all of the other vehicle expenses are proportionate to the amount that you're actually driving for work. So if you use your vehicle 20% for work, then you can deduct 20% of the expenses. It's super, super important if you're going to deduct vehicle expenses to track the total kilometers that you drive in the year and the kilometers that you drive for business, because you need to be able to prove that to prove the percentage that you're driving for business and for personal. There's tons of apps that you can use for that. MileIQ is one, although like I've heard good and bad things, but there's tons of them. There's tons, so you can Google that and just find one that works for you. If you have any questions about any of that, please leave them in the comments for me and I would be happy to answer them. Yeah, hopefully people can deduct their expenses. For the home expenses, you have to be at home at least 50% of the time. So that's why we are getting close, because it's been almost 6 months. So we're getting close to crossing that threshold. I hope you're doing well, and I'll see you tomorrow.